welcome back to my channel. My name is Catherine Morgan, founder of the Money Panel, multi-award-winning financial coach and qualified financial planner. And I am here to help you manage both the practical steps around money and also understanding how our money mindset works, our behaviors, our emotions, our habits, our beliefs, because it's when these two things come together that the magic happens. Now, in today's video, we're going to be talking about pensions, and I'm going to be using my cup of tea approach to help you to understand and bust through some of the jargon that surrounds this topic of pensions in the UK. We're going to be covering what are pensions, what are the different types of pensions. I'm going to be talking to you about some of the important things that you need to make sure that you do, whether you've got an existing pension in place or you're thinking about setting one up. I'm going to be talking to you about contribution levels, how tax benefit works, how you can get free money back from money that you're investing. We're going to be talking about how to take the benefits. What are annuities? What's the alternative to annuities? We're going to be talking about how to read your pension statements. We're going to be covering intergenerational wealth planning, because pensions is a huge opportunity to be growing your wealth that can be passed down through the generations. I think this is incredibly powerful. And if you are married or in a relationship, or you have children or planning to have children, or you have family members, this is a way that you can grow wealth, not just for yourself, but also for your family. We're also going to be touching upon the impact of charges and how important that is to be aware of when you're setting your pension up. We're also going to be covering state pensions and how that works, and how actually you can first of all take the first step in understanding what entitlement you have, particularly when you're self-employed, to the state pension. And then finally, we're going to talk about, with a little cup of tea approach again, just really understanding exactly what you need to do to get started. So let's get started.
Now, I've come on this morning to have a little bit of a rant, actually, because I've been doing some research recently to have a look into some of the stats about how many freelancers and self-employed entrepreneurs are not investing in pensions. And I've come across a number of videos on YouTube, and I've just been watching a couple of them this morning. And there's actually some really incorrect information on YouTube about pensions. So I am here today to bust some of those myths. I am a pension transfer specialist. So as well as being a qualified financial planner, this is my area of expertise. So I feel like I am privileged to understand a lot about pensions, but I also understand that it can be very complicated, particularly when you're self-employed, particularly when you don't have access to employer schemes. So I'm here today to bust some of those myths and just give you some of the basics about how to get started with pensions when you're self-employed. Are you ready? Okay, let me just first of all say why it is so important that we don't ignore pensions. Actually, what I want you to do first of all is just completely ignore the fact that I'm talking about pensions. Because if I came on this video and said to you, right, who wants to understand how they can make and grow money for their future self? More people would be interested in that. As soon as you start putting the word pensions in there, people freak. And it's just semantics, it really is. The way that pensions work in simple terms is a little bit like a cup of tea, okay? If you are wanting to invest for your future, you cannot invest in cash, because in cash is just going to get eroded by inflation. The cost of living is going up every year. You think about how much a Mars bar cost you back in 1970 compared to what it costs now, actually not that far, 50 years later. So if you're starting this journey in your 20s and you're thinking about your financial future in your 60s and 70s, we've got to be thinking about not just sticking to cash. And it's a real common challenge for women, and particularly women. There's more women sticking to cash than there is for men. So this is one of the reasons why I want to share this with you, because I want to get more of you thinking about investing. Now, in terms of pensions, if you imagine that inside this cup is, so right now I have got a tea bag in here. Now inside this tea bag, I've got lots and lots of like herbs and all sorts of stuff. If you imagine that inside that tea bag, you've got Apple shares, Debenhams, John Lewis, Tesco's, Waitrose, Shell, BP, maybe some tobacco companies in there. There might be some pharmaceutical companies in there. They're all inside that tea bag. Okay. Now, it's not the pension, i.e. this wrapper that sits around the tea bag, that makes it bad. And the reason I wanted to say that is a lot of people think pensions are bad. You know, someone's told me that their pension lost money in the stock market, so pensions are bad. It's not the pension that's bad, it's what's inside it that will make the difference between whether it's good or whether it's not good. Does this make sense? So it's how you actually select and put together the investments that sit inside the pension wrapper, that sit inside this mug, that make the difference. And I'm going to share some things with you in this video about what kind of things to be thinking about. Now, the reason that you want to be thinking about investing into this particular wrapper, you know, this could be a stocks and shares ISA, this could be a pension. It's what's inside it that makes the difference, okay? Now, the reason that pensions are particularly great is because for every £80 you put into a pension, the government will give you 20 quid. So it's free money. They don't give you 20 quid into a stocks and shares ISA if you put £80 into it. But in reality, you could have exactly the same investment portfolio, one with a pension wrapper around it, one with an ISA wrapper around it, and the pension will always grow better because of the tax. I don't know why they call it tax relief, because it's not a relief. A relief is taking away. This is adding, like a tax adds. If you imagine you had two of exactly the same portfolios invested in exactly the same way, the pension will always do better because of the tax add that we get from the government. So it's free money. Now, if you're a higher rate taxpayer, you get even more. So for every £60 you put in your pension, the government give you £40. It's 40% tax relief. So that's one of the primary reasons why most people invest into pensions, is because of this tax add. Okay, the second reason why pensions are really important is the intergenerational wealth planning. Now, one of the issues that many of us will face is the issues of inheritance tax. Now, inheritance tax legislation will continually change, but right now in the UK, if your estate is worth more than 650,000 if you're in a relationship, if you're married, or 325,000 if you're single, anything over and above that is then chargeable to inheritance tax. Now, there are some additional reliefs and things on top of that, but at a basic level, that's current legislation. Now, for most of us, our properties are likely to be worth somewhere around that figure, 325,000. And so that this could potentially cause some problems when you're looking to pass on your wealth down the generations. Obviously, when you're married, if something happens to one of you, your estate passes to your spouse and there's no inheritance tax. But then when the second person dies and it then passes maybe to your children or family, then that's when inheritance tax can become an issue. Now, you may not be in that position right now where it's an issue, but think about how your estate's going to grow. Think about, you might be buying bigger houses in the future, you're building up your savings, your business. So this can become an issue. Anything that goes into a pension is ring fenced from inheritance tax. So this is your pension. Anything that goes into that is not subject to inheritance tax. So for the wealthy, and I'm not talking about necessarily the super rich here, if you're over that inheritance tax threshold, anything that sits in that pension doesn't go into the inheritance tax pot. So from an intergenerational wealth perspective, it's an opportunity for you to pass that wealth to your children or grandchildren or next door neighbor, whoever you want to pass that to, without inheritance tax. And inheritance tax can be massive. If your estate was worth £1 million and 650,000 of that is not subject to inheritance tax, but let's say 300, 400,000 of it is, 40% is the inheritance tax amount that your beneficiaries would potentially pay. That's huge, 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 huge. So intergenerational wealth planning is another really good reason why pensions are fantastic. I'm going to tell you a little bit in a second. I'm going to talk you through pensions freedom, because a lot of people think, oh, well, it's not worth it. I've only got £25 a month, or it's only going to be worth 10 grand in the future. It's not worth it. Yes, it is. And I'm going to share with you exactly why at the end of this video. Now, when it comes to pensions for self-employed, and let me know in the comments underneath this video if this applies to you. Are you self-employed, without a pension, i.e. without a current contribution to a pension. Many of you may have pensions from previous employments, for example, and I'll talk a little bit in a moment as well about what to do with those. But there are kind of three main types of pensions, okay? One is a personal pension. Now, for some reason in the UK, we have like 7 million different names for this personal pension. We call it a personal pension. It might be a stakeholder pension. It might be a defined contribution pension. And there's many others, but it's actually pretty much the same. The only difference between a defined contribution scheme is a personal pension. A personal pension is a personal pension. A stakeholder pension was just something that the government released back in the early 2000s, trying to encourage more people to save into a pension. And they just have set rules on stakeholder pensions, like they can't charge over a certain amount. There has to be a minimum contribution entry into a stakeholder pension of £20 per month. So it's just a personal pension. So if you have an old stakeholder pension, it's just a personal pension. So you've got personal pensions, otherwise commonly known as defined contribution schemes. The reason they're called that is because they are defined by the contribution that is going into the pension. Okay, that's all defined contribution means. The opposite of defined contribution is a defined benefit pension. Now, another word for a defined benefit pension is a final salary pension. It's the same thing. Why do we have so many names for the same thing? It's crazy. So a defined benefit scheme is the benefits that you get at retirement are defined by a number of factors. So many of you may be in current final salary schemes or have old final salary schemes. They're defined by your years of service with that organization and your salary. And there's some formulas that are used to calculate this. Now, final salary schemes or defined benefit schemes are like gold dust. Think about it. They are guaranteeing you a set income at a set point in the future based on your year's service and your income. Now, schemes will have different rules. So some final salary schemes will base it on average number of years. Some will do it in the final years. Many of you would have seen lots of changes with your final salary schemes. You've probably received a whole ton of letters about changes over the years and probably have no idea what any of it means, because no one really does, unless you get into the finite detail of pension transfer work, which is the work that I get involved in as a financial planner. But in reality, the reason why these schemes have changed is because organizations can't afford to continue to guarantee this level of income to their employees because people are living longer. So the demands, if you imagine this is HSBC, let's take that example, and all their staff members are paying into their pension, and HSBC are also contributing to their pension schemes. And HSBC have got to grow this pot enough to pay for all the people that are currently retired, because they're taking money out of that pot already, and all the potential future people that are going to be taking pension from this pot. So if you think about it, the way that this pot is determined is via lots of things, which I won't go into on this video, but lots of things like how the economy is growing, annuity rates, inflation, all sorts of different things, how long people are living. Obviously, if Mr. Smith is currently drawing 10 grand a year from his pension and he survives 40 years, that's a pressure on that pot. If he only lives for 2 years, not quite so much. So there's a lot of pressure on organizations that they have to make sure there's this constant monitoring of how much is in this pot. And this is where we come across terms like whether schemes are underfunded or overfunded. And many schemes in the UK are underfunded because they can't afford to carry on filling up this bucket for all these people that are going to take benefits from it in the future and currently. Does this make sense? So this is why schemes have had to change. They've had to think about, well, how can we continue to keep this bucket as full as possible because people are living much longer. And so they've had to make changes to some of the rules. But even despite all of those changes, they're still fantastic pension schemes because they give you a guaranteed level of income. So those are some of the types of pension schemes. Now, as a self-employed freelancer or a self-employed entrepreneur, then it's difficult to kind of think about, right, so where do I get started? And I'm going to give you some information in this video about where to get started. But essentially, you won't be buying a final salary scheme because they're backed by employers. you'll be looking at a personal pension. Now, one of the common types of personal pensions is called a SIP, which is a self-invested personal pension, SIPP, self-invested personal pension. It's a personal pension. Self-invested just means that you have a bit more choice as to the types of investments that sit, going back to this cup analogy, inside that wrapper. Are you with me? So this is the pension wrapper. It's just almost imagine it like a piece of paper around an investment pot. A self-invested personal pension is like the sexy version. It's like the Brad Pitt version of a pension, basically, or the Cath Kidston Mug version of a personal pension. You've got more choice as to what you can invest in. So if you, perhaps not initially at the start, but let's say you get to really understand how to invest and you want to start investing in gold or property, or something maybe a little bit more unique, then you can do that under a SIP because it allows you more choice. Because it allows you more choice, typically self-invested personal pensions are more expensive. So their annual charges are typically more expensive than a normal bog standard personal pension. You know, so go back to this mug, you pay more for a Cath Kidston mug than you would for just a plain, 99 pence mug from IKEA, for example. So those are the types of schemes, okay? How much you can contribute into a pension, and I'm not talking final salary schemes here because that's not going to be relevant for you if you're self-employed, but how much you can contribute is governed by what the rules state in terms of how much we can put in every year. So for every single person listening to this video, whether you are self-employed or employed or not working at all, even as a stay-at-home mum, you are eligible, as long as you're a UK resident, you're over 18, and you are eligible to contribute into a pension. Now, at the moment, the what they call the annual allowance, the maximum that you can pay in every year is 40,000. So a bit like an ISA allowance of 20,000. You can put £40,000 every year, every tax year, into a pension. We're coming up to the end of the tax year in April this year, so these allowances will reset again from the 6th of April. Now, if you have sufficient money to make that level of contribution, and you want to pay more into your pension, you can go back for the last 3 tax years and you can carry forward any unused contributions. There are a few little rules around this, but you can carry forward 3 years of unused allowances. So for those of you who think I've left it too late, oh, I wish I'd done it last year, maybe you had some profits in your business, you can still go back and carry those forward. And that's just simply by when you complete the application form, there'll be some tick boxes and things that will ask you. Now, at this point, I will just mention, you may wish to seek financial advice or have some conversations with your accountant, because they'll be able to work out for you as well, depending on what kind of business you run, how to make that contribution in the most tax efficient way. So if you're a limited company, for example, you may want to consider making an employer contribution rather than an employee contribution. And I won't go into the technicalities of that on this video because I want to keep it very basic. But that's the annual allowance as to how much you can contribute. You don't have to pay it all in as a lump sum. You can make regular small contributions to a pension. Most pension providers will allow you to start with £20, £25 per month. And I'm going to share with you in a moment why I think you should all be doing this as a minimum at least. Now, let me tell you a little bit about how much you get back at the end, i.e. what's the point in doing this? And let me know underneath this video if you have any questions specifically around this. Now, one of the historical ways that we used to take benefits from that pension. So let's go back to this analogy. Let's say you've got, you've been paying in regularly over 10, 20, 30, 40 years into that investment. And let's say it's worth £100,000. That's actually fairly easy to achieve if you're making that regular contribution over a long period of time, which is really what you're doing when you're making pension contributions. This is paying your future self. So let's say that bucket's worth £100,000. Now, historically, before something called the Pension Freedoms Act, the only option that you had was to exchange that £100,000 inside that pension for what they call a pension income or annuity. And the way that works is you'd simply take this cup of tea, this pension, to a pension provider, you'd walk it along and you'd go to them and say, right, I've got this 100 grand, I'm a woman, I'm now, I don't know, let's say I'm 60, I'm in great health, or maybe not, maybe I've got some health challenges, which actually means you get more pension. It's actually the one time in your life you actually want to be ill or smoke or drink heavily, because they'll on an annuity assumption, what they're doing is they will take that pension pot and they'll be like, okay, so how long do we think Catherine's going to live? She's 60, she smokes like a chimney, she drinks like, you know, like a trooper. We think she's going to live for 5 years. And then they'll do some quotes and they'll come back to me and say, right, Catherine, for this £100,000, if you give us that 100 grand, we'll give you a fixed level of income until you die, basically. That's really the basics of an annuity. Now, obviously, they will also take into account your the average life of a woman of the age of 60, and they'll compare my health to somebody else, and they'll come up with this kind of idea. And then I might tinker along to the next annuity provider and ask them, what would you pay me if I gave you this £100,000? And then they would give me an idea. And I would basically go with the provider that would give me the highest level of income. Now, I would then receive that level of income fixed into my bank account, either yearly or monthly or 6 monthly, until I die. And if I'm married at the time, I might want to buy a spouse's pension, and therefore my income would be lower, because it's not just going to continue for my life, it's going to continue for my spouse's life. So my income would be lower. And you'll see this on your pension statements. For any of you who have existing pensions, one of the Financial Conduct Authority's rules is that your pension provider need to demonstrate and show you every year on your annual statement how much your pension's worth and how much you would get in retirement. But here's the thing. This is based on you. They're making the assumption that you are going to purchase an annuity, which you may do. You may decide to do that when you retire. But here's the thing. You don't have to purchase an annuity anymore. Under the Pensions Freedoms Act, the Pension Freedoms Act basically does, as it says on the tin, it allows you more freedom to draw those benefits without having to necessarily be forced to buy an annuity. Does this make sense? So let's say you've got this £100,000. You don't want to buy an annuity. Now, that could be because you are in poor health, for example, and you're thinking, well, I don't really want to give someone my 100 grand because I might, you know, I'm not in very good health. I think I'm only going to live a couple of years. Maybe you've got really bad family longevity. Maybe you've got some kind of hereditary illness or something in the family. It sounds awful to say, doesn't it? But there could be a reason why you may not want to do that. It may be because you want to pass it down to your kids. You want to pass that bucket down to your children. If you buy an annuity, you can't pass that down to children. So what Pension Freedoms allows us to do now is to have that choice. So that choice now might be, right, I'm not going to buy an annuity, but I'm going to keep it invested. So I'm not going to pull this now not very nice looking tea bag. I'm not going to pull that income out now. I'm going to leave it to brew. I'm going to leave it to sit there. But I do need a little bit of money from it now because I'm retiring. I'm going to take 25% out because that's what you can take out tax-free. And I'm going to go in, top up my cash. I'm maybe going to go on a cruise. I might need to replace my car, move house, whatever you're going to do with that. Okay, that's tax-free. The other 75% that's left in there, I'm just going to leave it in there. And I'm going to decide to draw down that income whenever I need it. Okay, then that's what they call income drawdown. You make the decision when to draw down that income. Now, the risk with this approach at retirement is that that bucket that is remained invested in the stock market might continue to be subject to the volatility of the stock market. So there's some risk there. There might also be some risk that the income that you then decide to take from that will run out. Okay, so there are risks associated with income drawdown. There's a few other ones as well, but those are some of the basics. So what you get from your pension in the future, it's just like your bank account. What you get is dependent on what you pay in, how long you invest it for, where you invest it. Think about it. If you're in your 30s right now, if the markets are doing this, which they do, because that's what markets do, and you want them to do that. You want the stock market to go up and down, otherwise you wouldn't make any money. Markets are very cyclical. They run on cycles, what they call boom and bust cycles, bear and bull markets you may have heard of. They go up, they go down, they go up, they go down. Now, you can minimize how much they go up and down by the level of risk that you take and the types of investments that you choose. And that's the key here. This is what you choose as a self-employed freelancer, entrepreneur. You have complete choice. So how your, the time frame will have an impact on what is available to you in that bucket later. How much you pay in charges is another factor, because each pension provider has their own charging structure. Now, I'm a huge believer in the impact that charges has on your pension can make a massive difference. Don't underestimate the difference that even 0.5% on a charge can make a massive impact on that pot. If that's £100,000, 0.5% on £100,000 is a lot of money. So you do need to be mindful of what charges are being charged on the pension that you choose. Now, there are lots of fantastic, easy to set up pensions available right now, and particularly with what they call these robo-advice propositions, companies like Pension Bee, for example. Fantastic, easy propositions, but they're not the cheapest. So what that means is that the charges will have an impact on the growth of that funds. So charges is a really important factor. Don't underestimate that. The other thing that can also obviously impact on how much your pot is worth in the future is where it's invested. Now, I have a workshop coming up in April called Get Investing. I'm going to be talking about how the stock market works, what is risk, where you could be investing, not giving you specific financial advice, but giving you financial education so that you understand when you leave that workshop, you know what your choices are, you feel confident to be like, right, now I know what I'm doing, I know how much I need to invest. We're going to talk about how much you need to invest for the lifestyle that you want to continue, because, let's face it, I have no idea what income I'm going to need in retirement. I have no idea, but I do know I want to preserve my lifestyle that I have worked really hard to build right now. So that's a great starting point, to think about what lifestyle do you have, what income do you need right now. You're going to need that at least in retirement, if not more, because you're going to have more free time. The state pension is £168.60 per week right now. Like, that's nothing. That would probably pay my food bill and my petrol, and to go and spend all the time seeing my friends when I'm retired. So I certainly don't want to be relying on the state pension. And I'll drop a link in underneath this video if you are interested in coming to this investing workshop. Because investing is the principles. You can apply that then to pensions or ISAs or children's investments. The principles are still the same. But a word on state pensions as well, because I think this is really relevant. The rules around state pensions now is you need to have had 35 years worth of national insurance contributions to be eligible for a full state pension. Now, most of you will be eligible because maybe you've worked previously before you became self-employed. And even if you're self-employed, you are likely to be making national insurance contributions through your tax. If you're not sure, then go and speak with your accountant about that. But one of the big concerns for women is that we do tend to have gaps in our employment, because we may have had families. We may be carers for parents, which may mean that we've had to maybe retire earlier. So one of the ways to check is to go onto the gov.uk website, and I'll pop a link underneath this video, and you can do a state pension forecast. You can do it via paper, or you can just use your government gateway login, which I know is a little bit like getting through Fort Knox. But once you've got your login with your government gateway ID, you can just log straight in, have a look at your financial forecast for your state pension. And if there are any gaps in there, they will tell you, and you can then make an inquiry with the National Insurance Office as to whether you want to make up some of those missed contributions. What else do I want to tell you? Accessibility in terms of pensions, how you can access your pension currently, and again, this can change, is at the moment you can take your benefits from that pension at the age of 55. That's the minimum age. There is no maximum age. That pot could just stay there. As you know, for a personal pension, defined contribution scheme, your pension could just remain there forever. Maybe you may never need to access it because you're busy building up other semi-passive income streams in your business, perhaps. And one thing to check for all of you on existing pensions is you want to make sure that that pension has got a nominated beneficiary attached to it. And what I mean by that is a simple piece of paper. And this is, again, relevant for any of you who are employed or have previous pensions that were attached to when you were working for an organization, is go and check who your nominated beneficiary is, who's going to receive that pension if anything happens to you. The number of times I've spoken to people who maybe have older beneficiaries on there, maybe exes, or people they don't necessarily want to receive their benefits, or have no beneficiaries selected at all. And it makes it very difficult for the pension trustees then to know where to pay it. So an action step for all of you, go and check your beneficiary statements. Make a phone call to HR if you're working, or if you've got a previous employed pension, go and grab one of your statements and make a phone call and just ask that question. Who does my pension go to if anything happens to me? And if you want to update or change your beneficiaries, they'll normally be just a simple form, often that are just sat on their websites anyway. Now, one of the things I also wanted to tackle here, and it's one of the excuses or reasons why people think, no, I'm not going to bother, is because maybe you're sitting here and you're in your 50s or you're in your 60s already, and you're thinking, right, should I get started now? Absolutely, 100% yes, because going back to this analogy, you'll get tax added in from the government. You can keep that money, you don't have to buy an annuity anymore. It can be passed to your beneficiaries with no inheritance tax liability. And also from an income tax perspective, if you die before the age of 75, your beneficiaries receive that pot tax free. Like, that's amazing, right? Unfortunately, if you die over the age of 75, they will tax them. So make sure you die when you're 74 and 364 days old, and then your beneficiaries won't pay any tax. So if you're sitting here in your 50s or your 60s thinking, God, I haven't done it and I want to get started, it isn't too late. It really isn't too late. And all the things that I've spoken about in terms of choosing a provider that doesn't charge the earth in terms of investment charges, choosing an investment strategy that's suitable for you at your age. And the reason I say this is, obviously, if you're starting a pension in your 50s or 60s, then your risk appetite is going to be potentially less, not always, but potentially less, because you haven't got as long to remain invested before you maybe now need to start taking benefits from that pension. But don't necessarily think because you're in your 50s or 60s it's too late. Another great financial planning option for people is, if you're in your 50s and 60s and you've got grandchildren, then you could be paying into pensions for them. You obviously need to make sure that you're checking that you're not exceeding any annual allowances, or you're not, paying too much into pensions. And the same if you're self-employed, you need to make sure that you're not breaching any rules with how much you can contribute. But I would imagine for the majority of you listening to this, you just want to get started, right? Or maybe you've got some old pensions and you're wondering what to do with those. Now, for those of you that are in my Money Circle membership, I did a whole bundle of videos around pension consolidations, what to check, how to read your statements, what things to consider, when you shouldn't be transferring, and what you could be considering. And again, not as financial advice, but just to give you some guidance around things you should be taking into account and things you should be ignoring. So if you are interested in coming into the Money Circle membership to get access to that training, then just let me know underneath this video. Alternatively, you can go and seek financial advice from an independent financial planner like myself, or anyone who may be local to you or perhaps have a recommendation. And again, the government do have a helpline that you can also contact. They have a pensions helpline that you can speak to as well if you have any questions. Or again, you could just speak to your existing provider of those pension schemes. Just give them a ring and ask them. They won't be able to give you financial advice, but if you've got a specific question, then they will certainly be able to help you with that. But there are, when you're looking at pension consolidation or pension transfers, there are some things to be mindful of and to watch, because some pension schemes that you may have will have penalties associated with transferring away. Some of them may have added benefits or guarantees attached to them. If you then transfer away, you lose those guarantees because pension legislation has changed so significantly. So there are a few things to watch out for. Guarantees and penalties are two of the main things to think about. But again, a simple phone call to your provider might answer those questions for you. Or if you're in any doubt, then reach out to a professional independent financial advisor, and they will be able to do some research for you on your specific schemes. So just to summarize that then, so pensions, don't ignore pensions just because they're called pensions. Don't necessarily think that they're not for me, whatever age you're at. And go back to that analysis here. It's just like a big bank account that has a whole heap of benefits attached to it. You have so much freedom and choice now as to how you can make contributions. You can start contributions from as little as £20, £25 per month, some even lower than that. And don't worry too much about, do I go into a SIP or a personal pension? It's the same thing. A SIP is just the sexy Brad Pitt version. It's the sexy Kath Kidston version of a pension. It may be more expensive for you to invest into a SIP because it gives you more bells and whistles and options. It's a bit like buying a car, really, isn't it? There's lots of options available to you. Obviously, the benefit of pensions over ISAs, for example, is that you get that tax relief, but I don't like calling it tax relief because it's not a relief, it's an ads. You don't get that in a pension. So that's a massive benefit of pensions over ISAs. Obviously, one of the other differences is that ISAs, you don't have the restrictions on how you take your benefits because you can access stocks and shares ISAs whenever you want to. Literally, you could invest tomorrow and draw the money out, in 10 years' time, in 2 days' time if you really wanted to, but obviously you wouldn't invest for a short period of time. Any investments should be considered over a longer period of time because you want to have that time to ride out the ups and downs that you can have in the stock market. But really, those are some of the two main differences. ISAs will go into your estate for inheritance tax purposes. That's another difference. But really, the actual investment strategy underneath, it can be exactly the same. You can have the same investment strategy with a pension as you can with a stocks and shares ISA. But access is obviously going to be very different.
So I hope you've enjoyed today's video, guys. Now, we have a whole ton of additional free resources available to you, checklists, downloads, all sorts of things over on the website. So if you're wanting to further develop your relationship with money, or perhaps you want to focus on some of the practical steps, then if you come over to the website at themoneypanel.co.uk, and you can find some extra resources in there. And if you're not in our Facebook community, please come over. We'll pop a link below this video. And I would love to know, from watching this video, leave me a comment below and let me know, what is your business? I'm really intrigued and curious to what is your business. So leave me a comment below this video and come and check us out again next week, ready for our next hot topic. See you soon, guys. Small steps, big wins. Let's go.